Guys, I tell you what, I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Four Rivers Church, for tuning in today. If you are in Paducah, Calvert City, or Edaville, all of our campuses together, if you would, even those of you watching this online, let's just kind of give the Lord a hand as we get started today. Celebrate all the things that He's done in our life. I tell you, one of the things about being a pastor is that you get to see or hear things that happen in people's lives. I get those reports of God did this or God did that. This week, just through Facebook and Twitter, I've heard many of you talk about how God has kept you in recovery from addiction or a marriage that we thought was just on the brink of despair that seems to be thriving and growing now. A couple of families or relationships where friendships were broken and forgiveness has happened. And all of those are signs of the Spirit of God working in and around and through you as a people. And I'm just really excited and thankful for all of that. Those are the kinds of things that human beings don't do, that God does when human beings obey Him. And obedience, that's my topic for today. I normally like being the kind of witness. We've talked about these two different primary types of witnesses. A witness is someone who speaks into your life like a witness would, but they're with you when they do it. You know, they don't want to just throw things at you. They want to go with you into life. I like being the open-handed witness. The open-handed witness is the person who caresses you when you're scared, who hugs you when you're nervous. They high-five you when you're victorious. You know, that's the open-handed encourager, Barnabas kind of witness. I like that. That's my natural place I like to stand. I like to let somebody else chew you out, and then I'll encourage you, you know, when you're trying to figure out how to handle that. Every now and then, though, we all need the other side of that, and that is the close-handed witness. This is the person who loves you enough to beat you into shape. You know what I mean? The person who's not nearly as concerned about how you feel as they are with what you're doing. You know, and they want you to behave. They want you to follow Christ. They want you to obey. They want you to become all that you can be. These are the spiritual drill sergeants of our life. And they're beautiful and wonderful, and sometimes we hate them, but they're so good for us, right? So by show of hands, at all places, all campuses, how many of you would say, I think I know I have one of those in my life? I have that kind of close-handed spiritual witness in my life. Anybody around? Okay, it looks to me, where I'm at, about 50% of the crowd said yes to that. These witnesses are so valuable, and yet, quite frankly and honestly, in our culture and even in our church, we do not tend to welcome this witness into our life anywhere near as quickly as we welcome the open-handed encourager who wants to cuddle and tell us how much they love us and how good we are. You know what I mean? And so today, our goal is to look at the Scriptures at a different kind of witness, a close-handed one. We're going to look at a guy named Jethro. That's a great, isn't it? Like Jethro, I just threw it out there. His name is Jethro, and we're going to find out something that he did for someone else's life, and ultimately all that God is going to do through us if we can find a Jethro figure to live out life in us. So let me tell you a story. It begins with a guy named Moses. You've heard of him before. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. We call that the Pentateuch, or the Law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses was quite the character. His story is a long one. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. Moses was born as a slave. His mother was fearful that he would be killed, as the king, the Pharaoh of Egypt at the time, who was enslaving them, had issued a decree that all of the male babies born about the time he was born with the ancestry that he had should be slaughtered, because the king was afraid that one of those babies would rise up and become an overthrower for his throne. And so Moses was supposed to die, but his mother was slick. She was sly. And she knew that the king had a daughter who loved babies. And so she found a way, put the baby in a basket, floated it down the river. The king's daughter finds the baby, goes to her daddy, kind of like a little girl with a puppy, and says, "Daddy, can I keep it? Daddy, can I keep it?" And the Pharaoh agrees. And she raises this son in Pharaoh's home. All of a sudden, this slave boy who was destined to die an infant is now similar to a prince in Pharaoh's kingdom. He was a man of power, education, ability. But one day, he began to recognize and realize his own value as a Hebrew man. And he recognized that the people he was working with, the Egyptians, were mistreating the people he was born with, the Hebrews. And one day he saw a Hebrew man being abused by a guard from Egypt, and he couldn't take it anymore. And in defense of his Hebrew brother, he killed one of the king's men. And he ran. He ran and he ran. He fled the country. He ended up in the area of Midian, where he met a man named Jethro. So literally, guys, just there's so many jokes here. He goes way out in the country and meets a dude named Jethro. I mean, could have been like Jethro Bodine, could have been, John Reap, the comedian, talks about being Metro Jethro. I mean, he meets this guy, this Bubba kind of fella out in the country. And this guy, this man that was old enough to be his father, this man had 7 daughters. Now, those of you at the Calvert campus, you guys might know a little more. I'm from Livingston County. Those of you in Paducah, you might have to imagine if you're from the city. But I just want to tell you something. You find a man in the country, raises livestock for a living, and he's got 7 daughters, and you're a boy about the same age as his daughters, and he doesn't like you. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a nice boy, say nice things. He's got 7 daughters, and you're a predator. He doesn't like you. He just doesn't, right? I knew that the first day I met my wife's daddy. He didn't like me, and he didn't know me, but he didn't need to know me to not like me. You see what I'm saying? I liked his daughter, and for that reason, he didn't like me. But Moses gets around this. Moses is walking through the Midian area, and he doesn't know the daughters, he doesn't know the daddy, he doesn't know anything, but he does recognize that there's a well with water, and there are these women trying to get water from the well. They're thirsty. And so he decides to be debonair. He decides to be helpful. He comes in to help them get their water. But there are other men who are mistreating them, and they're coming after them and being violent toward them. And I don't know the details of the story, but I can just imagine that Moses just killed a man in Egypt. Okay? And it's like a Johnny Cash song. Like I just killed a man in one town, and now I'm here, and if I need to kill you, I'll kill you too. I mean, it has that kind of masculinity welling up. He's obviously been taking his testosterone booster stuff. He's ready to go. And so he walks up to these guys who are picking on these girls, and he whips them all. I mean, just like walks in and whips them all. And they flee. They run away. And now Jethro's daughters are like, Oh, I love you. I love you. You're such a stud. You're such a man. I love you. And they all go home and they say, just like the king's daughter did, they go home and they go, Jethro, can we keep him? Can we keep him? I want to keep him. And so Jethro says, he gets the story, he figures out what's going on, and Jethro recognizes this is a man. This is a good man. This is a man who did a good thing. And so Jethro looks around, picks the daughter who is about the same age as the man, and goes, you want to get married? I got a daughter who would marry you today. And over time, we find that Moses marries Jethro's daughter and becomes a son that Jethro never had. He starts to help farming. He raises the livestock. We don't know exactly how long he's there, but the word seems to insist that he was there quite some time. He's there long enough that everyone in Egypt who knew he was a murderer died, and the story is long gone. It's old news. And then you guys have heard the story, right, of the burning bush where Moses is working for Jethro, his father-in-law, raising his father-in-law's animals, and a bush catches on fire, and God does crazy things, and Moses takes off his shoes, and it's holy ground, and God speaks to Moses and says to him, it's time that you go back to Egypt and you save your people. It's a really interesting story. As you read the next chapter, I'm in Exodus 2, 3, and 4 here, but as you read these chapters, what ends up happening is that God gives a direction, Moses makes an excuse. God gives a direction, Moses makes an excuse. God says, go do this, Moses says, I can't do that. God says, go do it this way, Moses says, I can't do it that way. God says, I called you to do this, Moses goes, I don't want to do it like that. And over, there are sentences that begin with, Moses excused himself by saying, or Moses made an excuse. Over and over and over. Now I want to ask you something. This moment, does this feel familiar? God telling us to do stuff and we know why we shouldn't, God telling us to do stuff and we come up with reasons why we can't. God kicking us out of the nest and us grabbing on with both hands and pulling ourselves back in. That's what's happening in the story. And so Moses goes to Jethro. Now, we're not told the details of what exactly is going through Moses' mind, so I'm going to speculate, okay? And the way I'm going to speculate makes the story even cooler. It's supposed to be funny. So, here's what I'm saying. Moses is going to his father-in-law to ask permission to take Jethro's daughter and the only grandkids Jethro has away, back to Egypt, where Moses is a slave. Hey, Jethro, I killed a man in Egypt. Again, back to the Johnny Cash song. I killed a man in Egypt, and I came here and I whipped a couple of men in Midian. I married your daughter. We had babies. And now I'm going to take your daughter and your grandchildren, and we're going to go back to Egypt because God is calling me there. Now, I think Moses was hoping that Jethro would go, no, you're not. You're not taking my daughter. You're not taking my grandkids. You're not taking any of my livestock. We made a deal. You stay here. I think Moses had made up like 10 excuses as to why he should not go. I think Moses is hoping for one more really good excuse. I think Moses wants to look up to God and go, Jethro won't let me go. You know? But Jethro doesn't do that. Let me read the story to you. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 18, I'm just going to read it. It's very specific. It doesn't give us any details. It's just quick. It says, so Moses went back home to Jethro, his father-in-law. And he said, please let me return to my relatives in Egypt. Please let me. This is a permission request from Moses to Jethro. This is a submissive permission request. Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt, Moses said. I don't even know if they are still alive. Doesn't that sound like he's painting like a bad picture? Like, I'm gonna take your daughter and your grandkids into slavery to go see people who might be dead. Okay? And then Jethro replied, go in peace. Now, again, it doesn't tell us the details, but I think Moses went, okay, I won't. Thank you very much for knocking my... What did you say? And Jethro says, go in peace. And Moses goes, huh? What? Go in peace. The scripture then says, before Moses left Midian, the Lord said to him, return to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you have died. It's got to be encouraging. For all those who wanted to kill you have died. So Moses took his wife and his sons, and he put them on a donkey, and he headed back to the land of Egypt. In his hand, he carried the staff of God. And the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all these miracles I have empowered you to do. But I will harden his heart, so he will refuse to let the people go. I don't know if you get that, because we read the Bible, and especially if you read like the King James translation or something where the words can be all big, smart sounding, we read right over the fact that God just said, I'm calling you to go do something that's not going to work. I'm calling you to go do something, and I'm telling another guy not to do what I'm telling you to tell him to do. Like, seriously? Like, I'm sending you into slavery with your wife and your kids into a place you don't want to be. I'm sending you to a place you're going to be punished. It's going to be hard. You're not going to like it. I'm sending you to a town you don't want to live in, to a place where your mama's already dead. I'm sending you to all of that stuff, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't work. Thank you, Lord Jesus. Like, seriously? Seriously? And here's what I'm telling you. You see, we have to get this in our mind. God calls us twice. First, He calls us to become a follower of Christ. All of us. If you're here today and you say your sins are forgiven by Jesus, it's because He called you. If you say it and you don't mean it and it's not real, then He's still calling you right now. And you can say all you want, but the truth is God is still saying to you, give your life to me, trust your heart to me, and I will make you a new creation. That's the first call. Second call is, now that I've saved you, let's do something with you. Now that I've created you into this new person, let's do something with that creation. You see, the Bible describes God as the potter with pot in some ways, and He's not going to like create this beautiful pot and put it on a shelf, and that's its purpose. Like, isn't it pretty that I made a pot, and the pot is on the shelf? I like that. You know? No, that's not it. He created the pot, and now there's something He's going to do with this. Some purpose, some intent, some reason. God doesn't just call you to be saved, but He calls you, once you're saved, to be useful. And that's like my calling to be a pastor and other people's callings as husbands and wives and fathers. And it's why God calls us in our jobs to lead people to Christ and to care for those who don't know Him. And every now and then, you and me, we do what Moses does. We're like, okay, I'm saved. I'm going to heaven. I'm good with that. That's good. I like that. I'm happy about that. My sins are forgiven. Yeehaw, praise Jesus, hands to heaven. Like we got that. But then God starts saying, like He did to Moses at the burning bush, I'm calling you to do something with your life. I'm calling you to change somebody else's life. I'm calling you to do something. It might not even work, but I'm calling you to do it. It might not result exactly in the way you want it to, but I'm calling you to do it. It might not get the results that are the things you're imagining and hoping for and dreaming of, but I'm calling you to do it. And if you're like me, then when God creates that kind of calling, I start like Moses going, that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea. I don't want to do that. I don't like that. I don't know if I need that. I'm not sure if that's right. I don't think I'm hearing from God. That's got to be the steak I had last night. You know what I'm saying? Like you start making excuses. And sometimes we need a Jethro. What I'm going to call a butt kicker. Like, doesn't that fit the name Jethro? Like, he just sounds like a butt kicker. You know what I mean? He raised 7 daughters. He is a butt kicker. I'm sure of this, right? I guarantee you those other shepherds would not have been messing with Jethro's daughters at the well had Jethro been there, right? And had they known it was Jethro's daughters, they probably would have left him alone. This Jethro guy, Moses has killed a man, whipped a bunch of other guys. He's still asking Jethro for permission to go to Egypt. See what I'm saying? This guy is tough. And I'm not just talking about physical abilities. I'm saying that there's something about Jethro that when Moses hears Jethro say, go in peace, Moses goes, okay, I will. God told him to do it. He said, I'm not so sure. Jethro tells him to do it, and he goes, okay, I will. You see the difference? This is cool. This person has the influence over Moses' life to go, get out there and do it. And he did it. He did it. I want to tell you a couple of things about Jethros that you need to know. First, Jethros will kick you forward, not down. When we think about kicking somebody, we almost always think of that as a bad thing, Kick you when you're down, like kick me out, kick me away, kick me to the curb. Those are all bad, negative things. Nobody wants any of that, right? I don't want to be kicked when I'm down. I don't want to be kicked to the curb. I don't want to be kicked out of anything, right? I get that. But Jethro's kick, they really do kick. Foot, butt. That's what Jethros do that. But they kick you up, not out, not down. You see, Jethro, the way he kicks him, he says, go in peace. And actually, I'm not a Hebrew guy, but the reading I've done on this says it's not really go in peace. It's translated go in peace, but the participle is to. Go to peace. Go to peace. In other words, peace is over there, not here. If you want to live a life of peace, then do what God told you to do. You've got to go to find peace. You're not going to find peace here. Jethro is not the open-handed witness who's going to hug him and go, it'll be okay, man. It'll be all right. I'm going to love you through this, That's not Jethro at all. Jethro says, if you ever want to find peace, you've got to go to Egypt. If you ever want to find joy, you've got to go to Egypt. If you ever want the kind of life that you want, I know you want it, then you better do what God said do. You've got to go to Egypt. Am I making sense? It's not go in peace, it's go to peace. Sometimes I think when we hear people like this guiding and directing us, what we hear them, they say go in peace, we hear them say rest in peace. Rest, it's going to kill you, you probably shouldn't do it. This is not going to be easy. It's so much easier to just kind of hang out at church a little bit, sing the right songs, listen to the right sermons. Every now and then if you could share a Bible verse on Facebook, maybe. But besides that, do not risk doing what God tells you to do in life because it will kill you. We think rest in peace. Or maybe we don't think it will kill us, but it will kill our influence and kill our intentionality into other people's lives. And so we just don't do anything. You see, Jethros will kick us forward. They care more about our future than our present. They really do. Jethros, they're more directly concerned about what's going to get us from here to there. Okay? You see, I'm from Western Kentucky, like many of you. And when somebody here, when I went to Tennessee for college, they used a different word. They used the word bless to mean curse. I'd never heard it before. My roommate said, boy, that guy really blessed me out. And I went, what? He did. He blessed me out. He cussed me. He did all kinds. He blessed me out. Anybody ever heard blessed me out used in that way? I have not. I'm seeing a few who have. See, I think when the Jethro blesses us by saying, go in peace, do it. Do what God told you to do. So they mean to bless us, but sometimes we don't like that kind of blessing. It feels like a curse. And we start going, wait, why didn't you hug me? Why didn't you just cry with me and tell me it's going to be okay? Why are you telling me to go do what I don't want to do? That's not why I came to you. I came to you because I wanted encouragement to disobey God. That's what I wanted. But you are blessing me, and that does not feel like a blessing. See what I'm saying? It's important that we recognize what a blessing looks like from them. You see, we need to know the difference between a true blessing and a cursing. And when someone lovingly puts the spiritual boot to the derriere, that is a way of blessing us to be obedient to Christ. You see, the peace that they send you to is not peace and quiet. It's not restful ease. Jethros will challenge you to grab onto a piece of life and eat it up and live in obedience. When you feel like you've been spiritually neutered, when you've become complacent, when you begin to shrink back from the mission of God, you need a Jethro to keep you loyal to the things that God has called you to do. You need a Jethro to wake you up from laziness, to get you off the couch of life, and to help you channel all of your energies into obedience. This is a Jethro. Now, there are passive Jethros and there are active Jethros. I think it's possible to do it either way. A passive Jethro is someone who simply will not give you a way out. You see, it would have been real easy for Jethro in this story to go, you can't take my grandkids to Egypt. You can't take my daughter to Egypt. I guarantee you Jethro did not want him taking those people to Egypt. Jethro could have given him an out. Jethro could have said, you go and I'll keep them here. And then there would have been some sort of good biblical way for Moses to go, I can't leave my wife and children. That's my first calling. I can't do that. God would never call me, to leave my wife and children, and their father won't let them, my wife's father won't let them go, so I'm going to stay here. Lord, I would love to be obedient, but it's just not possible. See? And passively, Jethro said, I'm not going to put something in your way and take away this opportunity you have to obey. Active butt kickers, they will literally push you out of the nest because they want you to find what's next. They will push you out of the nest in order to give you what's next. They won't accept your excuses. They will not hear it. Active butt kickers aren't satisfied. I love this. They're not satisfied with you being you. This happens all the time. Talking to somebody, I love it. Some of you have done this before, and now I'm talking about you, okay? I'm talking about you. Come up to me, talk about, I sinned, but that's just who I am. It's just who I am, and I guess everybody's going to have to get used to that, And an active butt kicker will say, no, maybe that is who you've been, but that is not who God created you to be, and that is not what God wants from you today or tomorrow or the next day. Okay, accept it. That's who you were yesterday, but that's under the blood of Christ and done. So be somebody different today. That's what an active butt kicker will say, and you will feel like you just got blessed out. Like, oh my gosh, you were so mean. No, they love you. They love you, and they're trying to help you make sure that you follow Christ. So like I said earlier, Jethros or butt kickers, they will kick you forward, not down. The next thing you need to know, as I kind of close this out, is that Jethros are less concerned about how you feel and more concerned about how you matter. Less concerned about how you feel, more concerned about how you matter. See, listen, and again, I catch myself tending to be naturally an open-handed witness. Like I myself naturally tend to want to be concerned about how somebody's feeling. You know, I want them to be encouraged. I want them to have joy. I want them to have hope. I want them to feel good. I want them to put their head on the pillow at night and be proud of the day. You know, like that. I like to encourage, like point out the good things, the things that they've done. But every now and then, I'm put in a situation or in a relationship where I have just nice worded somebody so much and the downsides of their life are not changing, and I have to close my hand. Have you ever done, have you ever done this? Like, I like, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to be. But every now and then you have to be right here. And that's when it tends to be hard. It tends to be hard because now you have to say, man, this is going to hurt you. What I'm about to tell you is going to make you cry. I'm about to tell you something that's going to test whether or not you'll ever listen to me ever again. I'm about to tell you something that's true and honest, and I love you, and I hope that you see how much I love you, that I'm willing to say this. But dude, in this particular area of your life, you stink, and it needs to change. People go, how could you say that? It's because in this moment, a Jethro loves you enough to tell you the truth. Am I right? Let me just tell you, I will forever be indebted and thankful to the encouragers in my life. But the truth is, if I want to just pick out 2 or 3 men who have helped me take a huge step up in my faith and in my call to God and as a dad and as a husband, they have all been Jethros. All of them. All of them. I remember Pastor Steve Ayers, who was the biggest Jethro I've ever been around. This guy has hurt my feelings more than anybody I've ever known. He loves me that much, okay? I remember making a gigantic mistake in ministry. And he came and he sat down with me and he said, why did you do this? And I said, well, I assumed that. And he stopped me and he pulled a piece of paper out and he slapped it on the table and he gave me a pencil. And he goes, you know what assumed means? I'm not going to tell you, but you guys know that like joking story there, right? It makes something out of something. I'm just going to say it that way. He made me write it down. And then he said, write it 100 times. And I went, I'm writing it. And he stood there and he goes, write it again. Write it again. Write it again. I'm at my mother-in-law's restaurant surrounded by a bunch of people who think I'm a good pastor at the time. Right? And he's embarrassing me and frustrating me, and I'm going, I'm writing as fast as I can. Write it again. Write it again. And here's the deal. Here's the deal. That was 10 years ago. I don't think I've assumed anything ever since then. Right? And if I do, I think, please don't tell Steve. Please don't tell Steve. Please. See what I'm saying? Like, this guy made an impression on me. He said, this is something wrong with you, and it needs to change. And if you want to be used by God and you're serious about this, you will get better. And I thank him for that. And it didn't feel good. And I didn't leave going, Steve is such a nice guy. I didn't. I went, who in my phone can I call that will be an open-handed witness to me and make me feel better? I did. But at night, that night, and the next day and the day after, the person who made me better is the person who was willing to tell me that I needed to be better. The Jethro, the butt kicker in my life. 2 questions they'll ask you in one way or another. They will ask you, what if today were your last day? What if today were your last day? I want you to ask yourself that question. What if today were your last day? What are some things that you need to do before your life ends? Another question they'll ask, and this one might even be better. What if today were your first day? What if today were your first day and you've got an entire life of ministry to do, an entire life of calling from God? If today were your first day, what would you invest in and where would you start growing and what would you start doing? The Jethro will require you to look for an answer to both of those questions. As you know, I've been reading a book called 11. I've read it 3 or 4 times now. 11 indispensable relationships you can't live without. It's a great book. This is a quote from it. As I close out, I think this is on page 70 of the book. He says, Leonard Sweet says, Jethros push us out the door while telling us, trust God, He will open the way. Who keeps your feet to the fire? Who keeps your hands to the plow, both in your blessedness and your brokenness? Just as bruised apples make the best pies, I love this, bruised and broken people make the best blessers and blessings. And whose feet need to have the temperature raised on them just a little, their hands reacquainted with the grip of the plow, their curse reversed, and their spirits lifted up. Ah, yes, the joys of a boot to the caboose. Thank you to all of our Jethros. Would you pray with me?